Your age? Doesn't matter. Sex or gender? Doesn't matter. Prior experience in programming? Helps you out, but doesn't matter. If you haven't passed that threshold of barrier to entry, you probably don't even know where to begin. Now this is the most important part. There is no shortcut to this. I want to share with you how I learned to make digital games well enough to be accepted into a master's program in one of the top universities in the world to study game development, as well as be a recurring guest in Blackthorn Prod's game development challenges. I want to be as encouraging as possible while also being realistic. This is how I did it, and this same approach will work for you as well. So please, after you've heard what I have to say, if you found it useful, motivational, inspirational, I really want to know if I managed to convince you to start making games today. Now, if you're just here for the short answer, it's dumb luck, online courses, passive learning, and practice. If that's all you wanted to know, thanks for watching. And for the rest of the video, I'm going to tell you what you need to learn and tell you my personal story as to how I went about it. Now, big disclaimer, yes, you do need to learn programming. Making digital games requires programming in some form or another. There's no way around it. You can't play ice hockey without skating. Visual programming, like Unreal's blueprints, is still programming. The only difference is you're not typing. You may find a code editor maybe is a little bit intimidating and visual nodes much more approachable, and that's okay. Under the hood, it's all the same. But like for me, I've been programming games for 4 years now, and I cannot wrap my head around Unreal's blueprints. I find node-based programming unnecessarily complex and difficult to comprehend. But reading a list of instructions in a code editor seems very natural to me. Now, whichever way you prefer, there is some work you have to do to learn to do it. And I'm just here to tell you that you can do it. You can learn to make games. Your age? Doesn't matter. Sex or gender? Doesn't matter. Prior experience in programming? Helps you out, but doesn't matter. Amount of free time? Will slow you down, but won't stop you. Now let's get to the point. First, I'm going to tell you what you need to learn, and then I'm going to tell you how I went about learning this stuff. There is a barrier of entry to making digital games, and that is programming. When you're making a digital game, somebody has to code, and I'm assuming if you're watching this video, that's going to be you. Now, in case you don't know programming yet, it might seem like an impossible task, and you don't even know where could I start. Now, it's important to remember that you do not have to be a master programmer to make games. I'll give you an example. I can't play the guitar, but I can strum some chords and sing along with it. Does that make me a guitarist? Of course not, but I can play a little bit. There's a gradient between knowing nothing at all and being a senior software development engineer. Just because you're not the best at something doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Now, once you've learned the absolute basics, there's already hundreds of game mechanics you can build with those and thousands of games that you could make. Like, sure, you can't make Fortnite with just the basics, but you could make like Undertale, Shotgun Roulette, or like Choo Choo Charles. The basics of programming that you need to learn are: what is a class or an object? What is a variable? What is the difference between a value type and a reference type in variables? What is a function/method? What is a main loop or an update loop? And what is a conditional statement? The fundamentals of programming are the same across all programming languages. Everything else is just syntax, meaning what is something called in this particular language, and you can Google syntax. If you understand all of these basics, you can probably make 50% of all the games you've ever played. Now let's quickly go through what all of these basics are just to lower your barrier of entry to game development. A class or an object is a self-contained piece of program that holds data and functionality, and it can be copied or instanced as many times as you want. For example, you might have a player class and you might have an enemy class, and both might hold functionality for movement as well as hit points. A variable is a box in which you place something that can change over time. In games, this might be a player's hit points, amount of currency, or what weapon they have equipped. The difference between a value type and a reference type is the difference between amount of money on your bank account and your bank account number. A value type is like the money in your bank. If you draw or deposit money into your account, it's a single value, which is the amount of money. Your account number is a reference to your bank account, and you can have your account referenced in different places, like your saved payment information on Steam, your bank card, or a piece of paper on your desk. It's a number, but they all reference the one same thing, your bank account. And using that reference to say, change the number of money on your bank account, will all do the same thing from different places. If you change your payment information on Steam, it will change which bank account it references to. A function or a method is a self-contained set of instructions for the program to do, such as take in the player's current weapon damage and deduct it from its current hit points and check if we died. A main loop, or an update loop, is how all computer programs work. The computer reads a list of instructions top to bottom, and when it reaches the bottom, it starts over from the top. Here's what a main loop in a video game might look like. Check for input, update variables based on input, render to screen, check if player wants to quit. A conditional statement is an instruction for the computer to change what it does based on the current state of variables. An example, if distance to player is less than chase distance, chase player, else patrol. There, now you already have a fundamental understanding of the basics. You already know what you need to learn, and pretty soon I'll tell you how easy it can be. Now after you've learned all of these basics, then it's just about learning techniques, algorithms and structures that help you make more and more complex systems for your game. Like let's say you need to find the closest enemy to the player out of these 200 enemies on screen. First time you do it, you might have to Google it and scratch your head, but after you've done it twice, you'll never have to think about it again. And I cannot stress this enough, you do not have to be able to code like CodeMonkey or John Carmack to be able to make great games. Players will never see your code. They do not care how you program the game, they do not care if it's clean, they do not care if it's difficult to maintain, they only care what your game feels to play. Did you know that Celeste's character controller is over a 5,000 line long single class? And did you know that Undertale's dialogue system is just one single switch statement? Now once you've learned programming, you will understand why both of these things are absolutely objectively the wrong way to do something. But notice how it didn't stop either of these games from being absolutely great and also financially successful. Your code does not have to be perfect, but your game does need to be good. You do not need to be able to play the guitar like a professional in order to have fun around a campfire. Making art assets, sound effects, or game design are essentially secondary at this point. If you lack these skills, they won't stop you from making games. Here's a small game that I made with Unity's default circle and a cube, some free star sprites, and the color blue. Okay, now finally, let's get to my journey of getting into game development. This is part 1 of 4. Dumb luck. I've been watching Bracky's videos and devlogs for several years without ever attempting to make anything. I was just interested in how games are made. It was in the fall of 2021, and I was working on the show Big Brother at the time, and I was walking to my local pub to get an after-work beer. I saw a YouTube short from Grant Abbott, a Blender tutorial maker who was advertising that for a limited time with this code you could get a discount on a Unity game programming course at gamedev.tv. With this code, that course costs €9. It was incredibly cheap, it was less than the beer I was currently going towards. I just thought it would be something fun to do after I finished working on the show, so I bought it and didn't think about it for several months. Beginning of December 2021, I sat at my computer and opened up the course with the intent of starting to learn how to make games. And I suddenly realized that the course was over 20 hours of lectures, and it went from the absolute beginnings of installing Unity to completing 5 game projects in different genres. The course in question was this one, Complete Unity 2D Developer Mega Course, Design and Develop 2D Unity Games in C#. Now I have absolutely no affiliation with GameDev TV, nor am I sponsored by them in any way. I just want to say that most of their products are super high quality. They're very well structured and incredibly cheap for the quality of content. They list the full price of a course, but that's not the price you're supposed to pay, even they don't expect you to. Most of their courses are discounted almost all the time, and you're supposed to pay the discounted price, which is usually between 10 and 20 euros. That's about the same in dollars. I recently met a game designer at Remedy Entertainment who said they had learned to code with GameDev TV courses. Now if it's good enough for the people who made Alan Wake 2, I'm pretty sure it's good enough for you too. Part 2? Online courses. It took me over a month to complete that course, but after having completed it, I knew enough about Unity and C# just to learn new things by reading the Unity documentation or trying stuff out. After I finished that course, I spent a couple of months trying to add features to the course games that we made, just like deciding that, okay, I want to add a speedrunning mode, and then just googling how to make it. After that, I started my first solo project. It's an endless runner joke game about my friend who has an unhealthy relationship with game cosmetics. Notice how doing just one course, I was able to make a game by myself just by reading the Unity API. And remember, this was before ChatGPT was a thing. After that game, I made this board game. It has an AI opponent that you can play against with 3 different difficulty levels. I got completely hooked on learning game development, and I went through a ton of courses on gamedev TV, like their multiplayer course, as well as some of Grant Abbott's 3D courses on making game assets. Now, still to this day, when I spend 8 hours a day at university learning game development, I will still go through gamedev TV's online courses if I have some free time. It's become a relaxing thing that keeps my fundamentals strong and occasionally teaches me something new that I didn't know already. Now here's something where I might differ from you. I have this thing where I often will get fully immersed into something that interests me. Before I started making games, I was actually looking at a lot of programming tutorials and GDC talks just for the fun of it, not even with the intent of doing it myself. This ended up being insanely useful, as some of that information does stick with you. Especially if you're doing this stuff at the same time, this is incredibly useful as you build up this reservoir of passive knowledge. Part 4, practice. Now this is the most important part. There is no shortcut to this. You do have to make games. You do have to practice. It doesn't really matter how you practice, just as long as you do it. Start small. Your first game will not be your best game. At least I hope not. Many people recommend you make Flappy Bird as your first game, but this is coming from the point of view of somebody who sort of already knows how to do that stuff. But if you haven't passed that threshold of barrier to entry, you probably don't even know where to begin. This is an impossible task, as you don't even know what questions to ask. This is why I fully recommend you start with online courses and a structured learning environment that will get you past that barrier to entry really quickly and efficiently. Because after that, you know what questions you want to ask either Google or ChatGPT to learn new things. I would recommend you make something even simpler than Flappy Bird. Make a game where you are a white rectangle that collects yellow circles, you have a score and a timer on top of the screen, and you can quit back to main menu. You will learn much more and much quicker by making a lot of really small games than making one big game. Now think about it. Which do you think will make you a better game maker? Spending 6 months making one character controller, or spending 6 months making 5 different character controllers? Now remember, this is the game I made after I have finished my first online course. And as a beginner, this took me several weeks. Now I could do it in a couple of days. After I've learned the basics and made a couple of games, I joined a game jam with some friends. This was my first time programming for a team and also doing it completely solo. Once you've reached the level where you can make basic game mechanics on yourself, game jams are the best way to learn. They provide an outside incentive to make games, as well as time and thematic restrictions. I'd been thinking about wanting to make a game where I could practice making a dialogue system, and I'd been thinking about this for weeks. Then I joined a game jam where I needed to make a dialogue system, and suddenly, 5 hours later, I had already made a dialogue system. Now, instead of thinking about it for weeks, I spent 5 hours figuring it out. Since 2003, when I did my first game jam, I've taken part in over 10 game jams, and each one has taught me something new that I can take on to my next project. Here's something very important that I want to say to you. You can learn to make games if this is something that interests you. There is nothing special about me. You can learn to do this the exact same way that I did, and I sincerely hope that today I managed to say something encouraging enough to get you to start. Thank you.